book was a wild ride, complex, provocative, and, at times, even frustrating.
Yeah, same here. I kept nodding, then frowning, then flipping back a few pages. Let's start simple. When Taleb talks about a black swan, what's your core understanding?
So, a black swan is an unpredictable event that has massive impact. And after it happens, people try to explain it in hindsight as if it were predictable. But it wasn't.
Right, he gives examples like 9/11, the rise of the internet, and even World War I. No one really saw those coming, but after they happened, everyone had a story for why they were bound to happen.
Exactly. That's what Taleb calls the retrospective distortion. Our minds are storytelling machines.
Now, here's where I started to feel uncomfortable. If black swans are so unpredictable, how do we even prepare for them?
Great question. Taleb says it's not about predicting them, it's about becoming anti-fragile. He didn't fully dive into that in this book, more in the next one. But the idea is to structure your life or system in a way that benefits from shocks.
Like barbell strategies, right? Putting most of your effort in safe assets and then a small part in high risk, high reward stuff.
Yes, that's one of the ideas. You minimize your exposure to being wiped out, but keep the door open for upside when a black swan hits.
Okay, let me challenge this. Imagine we're running a business in 2007. Then the 2008 financial crash hits. We've no way of knowing it's coming. How exactly would anti-fragile thinking have helped us?
Good thought experiment. I think if we had no debt, some cash reserves, and we weren't overly exposed to subprime real estate, we might have survived or even thrived. Especially if we bought distressed assets later,
So it's really about not getting too comfortable in a stable looking system, because the most stable systems often crack the hardest.
right? The turkey problem is the classic metaphor here.
Yes, explain that one.
The turkey gets fed every day. For 1,000 days, life's good. Then day 1,001 comes, Thanksgiving. The turkey thinks the world is safe because of its past, but the future doesn't care about that.
So the point is, we're all turkeys. Unless we remember that the world isn't governed by averages, it's ruled by the unexpected.
Well said. Taleb keeps warning against the Gaussian mindset, believing in bell curves when reality is more like a power law.
You're referring to mediocristan vs extremistan.
Yeah, that concept blew my mind. Mediocristan is the world of predictable distributions, like human height. No one's twice as tall as another person, but an extremistan, like wealth or book sales, outliers dominate. A single person can have more than millions combined.
And yet, we apply tools from mediocristan to try and control extremistan. That's where the problem lies.
Yes, financial models, economic forecasts, even risk management, they often assume mild randomness. But in real life, the tails are fat. The improbable is not as improbable as we think.
That brings us to the idea of the ludic fallacy, using models that work well in controlled games like casinos, but fail in messy real life.
Right, because in real life, we don't even know all the rules or all the risks.
There's a strange comfort in that, realizing the world is inherently unpredictable. It lets you stop pretending you can master it.
And start preparing for what you can't see.
Let me ask you this. If you had to redesign our education system with black swans in mind, how would you do it?
Wow, that's a great question. I'd probably remove the obsession with precise predictions. Focus more on adaptability, creativity, and skepticism. Teach kids how to think, not what to think.
Would you still teach economics?
Yes, but with Taleb's warnings included. Less about perfect models, more about complex systems and uncertainty.
I love that. Now, let's talk about silent evidence, another mind bender.
Oh yes, we only see the survivors, never the failures. We admire successful entrepreneurs, but ignore the thousands who failed using the same methods.
which means we think we understand what causes success, but we're often just seeing the winners of a lottery.
And it gets dangerous when people draw lessons from that, be like Steve Jobs. That's not a strategy, that's survivorship bias.
So humility in the face of uncertainty becomes a kind of wisdom.
Exactly. The more confident someone is in their forecasts, the more skeptical I get.
Here's a dark one. Imagine you were a policymaker in 2001. Someone comes to you and says, "We need to spend $1 billion to prepare for a terrorist attack that might happen sometime." What do you say?
Most would say no. It sounds paranoid, wasteful. But if you don't prepare and the attack happens, suddenly that investment would have been priceless.
Which is the core tragedy of black swan prevention. You look like a fool if nothing happens.
Exactly. Success is invisible. Only failure is visible.
So we reward people who clean up messes, but not those who prevent them.
Taleb calls this the narrative fallacy. We love stories that have clear causes and effects. But black swans break the story.
I think we're just getting warmed up. Next, let's unpack how randomness and luck play a role in our daily lives, even when we think we're in control. So Chris, let's jump into this whole idea of randomness. Taleb argues that we mistake luck for skill way too often. What did you make of that?
It's honestly humbling. We look at successful investors, authors, athletes, and assume their outcomes are the result of superior planning or talent. But often it's just randomness in action.
That hit me hard too. Like, if you flip a coin 100 times, someone's going to get a streak of 20 heads. Doesn't mean they're a genius.
Exactly. The same applies to stock market gurus. Some outperform by pure chance, and when they do, we put them on magazine covers.
Which fuels the illusion. We think we can copy them, not realizing that luck doesn't come with an instruction manual.
Right? It reminds me of when Taleb said, "We see the winners and learn nothing from the losers because we never see the losers."
And that's dangerous because we keep building systems that rely on the illusion of control, even though control is a story we tell ourselves to sleep better.
That makes me think. If someone asked me, "What's one thing to stop doing after reading this book?" I'd say stop over explaining the past.
Yeah. Stop pretending you knew it would happen, or that anyone did.
Like in finance, after a market crash, everyone becomes a genius in hindsight. They say the signs were there, when really most of us were clueless.
That's the hindsight bias. It colors everything. We rewrite the past to make it feel more logical and less chaotic.
Taleb's fight is really with the experts, isn't it?
Big time, especially economists, bankers, and forecasters. He calls them empty suits with confidence.
And his point isn't that they're dumb, it's that they're overconfident in domains where randomness rules. And that's the real sin.
So here's a hypothetical. Say you're managing a company's risk portfolio. Your team brings you forecasts and models to predict the next quarter. What would you do post-Taleb?
I'd throw most of the models out, or at least treat them as rough maps, not the territory. I'd ask, what's the worst that can happen? And are we prepared for it? Not, what do we think will happen?
So more focus on tail risk, on resilience.
Yes, because the most harm comes not from being wrong, but from being confidently wrong and unprepared.
So the real risk isn't uncertainty. It's fragile certainty.
Well put.
You know what else stuck with me? Taleb's distrust of scalability in careers.
Oh yeah, the distinction between scalable and non-scalable professions.
Like if you're a baker, you make money per loaf. You can't scale infinitely. But if you're a writer or coder, you can write once and sell to millions.
And that means your income can have black swan-like jumps. 0 one day, then viral the next.
But that also means a lot of volatility, long periods of nothing, extreme uncertainty.
Exactly. And Taleb warns people not to romanticize those careers without understanding the randomness baked into them.
So he's not anti-risk, he's anti-ignorant risk.
Yeah, he respects people who take asymmetric bets, where the downside is limited and the upside is huge. That's intelligent risk.
Here's something personal. Have you ever had a black swan moment in your life? Something that came out of nowhere and changed everything.
Yeah. Actually, during COVID, I lost a job I thought was stable, completely blindsided, but that led me to start writing online, which eventually brought me new opportunities. Not something I ever saw coming.
Same here. Some of the best things in my life came from what felt like chaos. Breakups, failed plans, unexpected moves. At the time they felt like disasters, but they created space for something else.
It's funny. Black swans aren't always negative. They can be positive too. That's a point Taleb makes often.
Yeah, he calls them positive black swans, inventions, breakthroughs, life-altering discoveries.
But they're rare, and they're often dismissed or laughed at until they explode.
So the wise strategy isn't to predict them, but to make room for them.
Yes, keep a little chaos in your life. Don't over-optimize everything.
You know, I used to love planning, detailed calendars, 5-year goals, all of it. Now I try to leave some things open-ended, some uncertainty, and honestly, I feel freer.
Me too. There's something comforting in surrendering control, not giving up, but giving space.
Taleb would probably say control is fragile, but preparedness is anti-fragile.
That's beautiful. Should be on a poster
Or maybe a coffee mug.
with a black swan silhouette.
Okay, next up, we need to dive into the idea of platonicity and why categories can blind us. Ready for that rabbit hole?
Absolutely. Let's burn some mental calories.
So, Chris, earlier you mentioned the term platonicity. Let's unpack that, because I think it's one of the more subtle but powerful ideas in the book.
Yeah. Taleb defines platonicity as our tendency to fit messy reality into clean, idealized models. We create categories, boxes, and theories that oversimplify the chaos of the real world.
And in doing that, we ignore the unpredictable. We focus only on what fits into our framework, and we discard the outliers.
Exactly. But the outliers, those are the black swans. They're where all the impact is. So by focusing only on what's normal, we make ourselves blind to what really matters.
And ironically, the more confident we are in our models, the more vulnerable we become.
Because we stop preparing for the unknown. We stop asking, what if we're wrong?
It's like building a house on the coast, using average tide data, and ignoring the possibility of a tsunami.
Great metaphor. It reminds me of how companies design for the average customer, when in reality, there is no average customer. Just a statistical illusion.
And Taleb's whole critique is aimed at this delusion. We confuse the map with the territory. We assume neat curves describe a jagged world.
Especially the bell curve, the infamous Gaussian distribution.
Yes! He really goes after that, says it works well in closed systems, like casino games or measurement errors, but it fails in open real-world systems like economics or politics.
Because in the real world, there's no cap on how big an event can be. Stock markets can crash 90%. Wars can break out overnight. A single tweet can shift billions.
The bell curve underestimates extremes. It assumes most things cluster around the average, but reality doesn't care about averages.
So Taleb proposes the alternative fractal models. Power laws. Fat tails.
Meaning big events aren't as rare as we think. They're rare under the bell curve, but not in reality.
Right? And ignoring this leads to catastrophic blind spots.
So if I'm designing a city or a financial system or even planning my career, I better not assume smooth sailing.
You better assume the storm, maybe even multiple storms, and build accordingly.
So here's an imaginary scenario. You're in charge of a bank's risk department. Your team says, based on the model, we have a 99% chance of making profits next year. What's your move?
I'd say, great. Now tell me about that 1%. And then I design the entire risk strategy around surviving that 1%, not the 99%.
Survive the 1% and you thrive over time.
Yes. And that's the difference between fragility and anti-fragility. Fragile systems break under stress. Robust systems resist stress. But anti-fragile systems get better with stress.
And Taleb's core message is embrace antifragility.
Yeah. Don't aim to be invincible. Aim to get stronger through shocks. Like how muscles grow under pressure.
Or how evolution works. Mutations, chaos, trial and error. Over time, it builds something smarter.
So black swans aren't just things to avoid. They're also opportunities to grow if you're ready.
And I think that's the twist. Taleb isn't saying, fear black swans. He's saying, stop pretending they don't exist and build a life that benefits from them.
That's a radical idea. Instead of being a victim of randomness, you become its student, its partner.
Okay, let me push you a bit. Do you think it's possible to be too obsessed with black swans? Like always expecting the worst?
Good question. I think it's about balance. If you're constantly paralyzed by potential catastrophe, you'll never act. But if you ignore it completely, you set yourself up for disaster.
So acknowledge uncertainty, but don't drown in it.
Yes, build systems with redundancy, avoid over-optimization, but still live, still create, still take risks, just smart ones.
It's kind of liberating. Accepting that the future is unknowable.
It is. It takes pressure off the idea that we have to figure everything out. Instead, we build habits, guardrails, and leave space for surprises.
It's like sailing, you can't control the wind, but you can trim your sails.
And sometimes the storm will come anyway. But if your ship is ready, you might just find a new island.
I love that.
Me too.
All right, let's talk about narrative fallacy and our addiction to stories. Ready to question our own storytelling brains?
Ready and slightly nervous. Let's do it.
Okay, Chris, time to talk about the narrative fallacy. This one hit close to home for me.
Same here. Taleb describes it a tendency to create stories to make sense of events, even when those stories are false or overly simplistic.
Yeah. We crave patterns, meaning. And when something unexpected happens, instead of saying, we don't know, we create a neat story to explain it.
And in doing that, we miss the truth. We trade complexity for comfort.
Exactly. For instance, when a startup becomes successful, we look backward and say, they had the perfect vision, great timing, brilliant leadership. But really, it might have been mostly luck.
And survivorship bias plays into that too. We only hear about the winners, not the thousands who had great vision and timing and still failed.
Because they don't get book deals or Netflix documentaries.
Right. But their stories are just as real. And Taleb's point is by listening only to success stories, we develop dangerous illusions.
So here's a weird question. Do you think we need stories even if they're flawed?
That's tough. I think we're wired for stories. They help us make sense of the world. But maybe we need to hold our stories more loosely.
Like mental scaffolding, useful but temporary.
Use stories to act, but don't mistake them for truth.
I love that. And Taleb would probably add, don't use stories to predict the future. That's where things really break.
Because once you start thinking the past explains everything, you assume it can forecast what's coming. And that's dangerous in complex systems.
Exactly. Let's do a little test. Imagine a guy starts a small business. It fails. His friends say, you didn't hustle enough. Then another guy makes it big and they say, he worked so hard. Same story, opposite outcomes.
And the truth is both probably worked hard, but the outcome was affected by randomness, timing, maybe even one lucky connection.
But our minds don't like that. They want a clear cause and effect, an origin myth.
Because uncertainty is uncomfortable. We'd rather believe a false story than admit we don't know.
And that's what makes us vulnerable to black swans. We're too busy explaining the past to prepare for the future.
So I've started asking myself, after every big event, what part of this is just a story I'm telling myself?
That's powerful, forces humility, reflection.
Yeah. And sometimes it's painful. We like to think we're the main characters in a well-written novel. But real life's messy, unpredictable,
It's not a novel, it's improv with bad lighting.
and surprise guests.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit. What do you think Taleb wants us to do with all this? Beyond just awareness, what's the practical application?
Great question. I think one big takeaway is to build robustness in finances, health, systems. Expect disruption. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
And maybe also be humble about what you know, especially in domains full of uncertainty.
Definitely. And look for optionality, positions where you have big upside and limited downside.
Like writing online. Your first few posts might go nowhere, but one could take off.
Or investing in ideas with asymmetric potential, where failure doesn't cost much, but success can scale.
That reminds me, Taleb talks about the barbell strategy, right?
Yes, another practical idea. He says take a very conservative approach with 85-90% of your resources, then use the rest for high risk, high reward bets.
So you avoid being wiped out, but still expose yourself to potential black swans.
Exactly. It's like betting on extremes, avoiding the middle, which is where people assume safety, but actually have hidden risk.
And that challenges the classic idea of moderation being safest.
Yeah, Taleb says moderation is often just disguised fragility.
This kind of thinking really flips conventional wisdom.
It does. And that's why some people resist it. It forces you to unlearn a lot.
Okay, let me ask you this. Say someone's listening right now and they're overwhelmed. They want to apply Taleb's ideas, but don't know where to start. What would you say?
I'd say start small. Look at your life and ask, where am I exposed to downside I'm not seeing? And where can I create optionality?
That's great. And I'd add embrace randomness in low-risk ways. Try new things, take small chances, diversify your bets.
And let go of the idea that you need to predict everything. Instead, build a system that can survive and even benefit from surprises,
And stay curious, stay skeptical.
especially of neat stories,
Especially of confident experts.
especially of your own certainty.
All right, Chris, we're heading into the last part soon. Any thoughts on where we should take it?
Let's explore the idea of antifragility, the philosophy behind it, how to build it in daily life.
Perfect. Let's close strong. All right, Chris, last stretch. Let's dive into antifragility. Probably the most powerful idea Taleb gives us.
Yeah, so we've talked about fragile things. They break under stress. Robust things survive stress, but antifragile things, they get better with stress.
It's such a mind bender. Stress, chaos, randomness, they're good for antifragile systems like muscles or the immune system.
Or evolution, or even certain businesses like venture capital. Most bets fail, but a few huge wins more than make up for it.
And it makes you rethink your whole approach to risk. The goal isn't just to survive black swans. It's to benefit from them.
Right? Taleb wants us to invite volatility, but only if we've structured ourselves to benefit from it.
And that structure, he says, comes from avoiding things that are overly optimized, too perfect, too tight.
Because the more optimized something is, the less slack it has. And when a shock comes, it breaks.
Like global supply chains during COVID.
Exactly. They were designed for efficiency, not for resilience. And when disruption hit, they collapsed.
So let's bring this home. How can someone live an antifragile life?
Well, start by avoiding things that depend on being right all the time. That's fragility.
Like a job where one mistake ends your career, or investing everything in one stock.
Yeah. Next, build in options. Try more things. Expose yourself to upside without risking total ruin.
Taleb calls it having skin in the game. Don't just theorize, act, test, learn from real consequences.
And listen to reality, not models, not experts who don't bear the cost of their advice.
It's also about subtracting, cutting out dependencies, reducing complexity where it adds fragility.
And maybe most important, embracing randomness. Seeing uncertainty not as a threat, but as fuel.
Okay, last imaginary scenario. If you had to teach a kid one life principle from the Black Swan, what would it be?
I'd say life is uncertain, so make sure you can grow from surprises, not just survive them.
I love that. I think I'd tell them, don't try to be right all the time. Try to be ready.
Beautiful.
So, Chris, after all this, has your view of risk and randomness changed?
I used to think intelligence was about prediction. Now, I think it's about preparation.
Yeah, about designing your life like a tree exposed to wind but rooted deep.
Or like a boxer. Take hits, learn, adapt.
And maybe even come back stronger.
The antifragile way.
All right, final thoughts before we wrap.
Just that Taleb doesn't offer easy answers, but he offers the right questions, and that's more valuable.
Well said. Black swans are rare but not invisible. We just have to open our eyes.
And stop clinging to the illusion of certainty.
All right, thanks for joining me on this one, Chris. This has been one of the most mind-opening conversations we've had.
Agreed? Let's keep embracing the chaos.
And learning from it.
Cheers to that.
Until next time.